camera flattering myself.
Oh yeah, hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi broadcast by Answers in Reason. And I'm your host tonight, Joe, and we have with us...
Dave?
And Martijn.
Awesome, so any of you out there in internet land who are not sure of who these gents are, I'd be completely surprised by that, because Dave obviously has been on these live streams with me, but is also a part of the Fresh Air broadcast and Answers in Reason as a blog. Martijn is joining us for the first time on the SciPhi broadcast. So he is someone who is a blogger and a podcaster for Answers in Reason. So he's on the Fresh Air podcast. He's got a lot of interest in things like philosophy and politics, especially political philosophy. But Martijn, I mean, don't let me take it all. Tell us all a bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, first off, I look like I'm having a stroke, but I guess that's just my face.
I can relate.
Well, you actually just basically said everything there. Also, lately I'm trying to get into being a journalist at some point in my life. So if anybody has any special relations to anything going on in the political or social zeitgeist at this moment, don't hesitate to send us a message and ask me to interview you.
I mean, that sounds awesome. Is there anything you can interview me for? I'm happy to be a prick for camera, as you well know. So, if you need a story, world's biggest dickhead, DJs from bedroom whilst discussing philosophy. There you go. There's your first story.
Oh, we might get into that.
But of course,
but thus far, I'm mostly interested in interviewing people from things like Antifa or if you're a Proud Boy, hit us up. Anything like on both sides of the impending race war we have in the United States, I'd love to interview you.
Excellent. So you heard that, right? You can catch him on Twitter under Artifical Agent. You can catch him on answersinreason.com. Just respond to one of his articles. You could probably harass him on Facebook. If you send me a message, I'll give you his personal details. I know where he lives. But yeah, honestly, I mean, I think we should support this guy's dreams. He's a brilliant guy. He's a brilliant writer.
Definitely.
And honestly, he knows his shit. And that's why he is here tonight, in fact. Because he has a lot of shit to say, right? So, my chat room actually is broken tonight, so I can't see what you're saying, and I don't know if anything's actually going to come through to the stream. I don't know why it's not working. I do apologize. But your best bet is probably to grab us on Discord tonight, just in case it's not going to come through. Oh, I can see Dave, though, from YouTube. Thank you for that test. Okay, so even my personal chat room and my ability to chat to you directly through the chat room is ruined for whatever reason. We can still see any messages that you're doing through. So he's done from YouTube, he's done from Discord. I assume that it's working everywhere else too. So it's just my view on it and my ability to respond by text. So carry on with any messages that you have with Martijn or any of us for this evening. Now, tonight's conversation is one of those ones that you might think it's a bit weird that three white boys are chatting about, but it seems to be that the voice of the people who actually need their voices to be heard is not being heard. And perhaps tonight we can try and shed a little bit of light on an issue that's going on somewhere in the world, right? So Martijn wanted to do an episode on Black Lives Matter, okay? And that is what we are doing tonight. We are discussing Black Lives Matter. So the first thing we generally need to actually cover off with that is, well, what is racism in the first place? And Martijn, would you like to take that one away?
Yeah, of course. Well, I would have preferred to jump right into the platform that BLM has. The problem is just that BLM refers a lot to racism without actually defining it, which you could see as a weakness on their part, but at the same time is it is something that seems a bit redundant to actually explain. Nevertheless, we do have a lot of misconceptions about what racism is, like uh, the idea that you should belong to something that is a race, and race is actually undefinable. I mean, are Muslims a race? Are people in the Middle East a race? Or if people in the Middle East are a race, then at what point towards Asia do you become another race, right?
Yep, definitely.
So, the theory I tend to use, and I think hasn't disappointed me yet at all, is the one that a philosopher called Falguni Sheth writes about in her book Towards a Political Philosophy of Race. What she basically says is that there isn't something that is actually a race. I mean, she starts her first two chapters, I believe, deconstructing the whole idea of a race. And then she says, what we're actually talking about when we're talking about race is a group of people who have been otherized into the point that we can refer to them as a race. So, what she basically does is she points to, for instance, Muslims, right? They have headscarves, they have the Islamic belief, and uh, at those on those principles, you can refer to them as being in a certain group. They are Muslims. What the what she then tells us is that there are certain negative traits that are tied into the group identity. So when you look, for instance, at the media, you will see a lot of coverage of people in Muslim countries bombing and shooting the shit out of each other. And we then start to associate that with being a Muslim. Therefore, you you mistakenly come to the conclusion that Muslims are violent people, and that is where the actual racism starts, right? I mean, that's where people start to refer to Islam as something very evil. Well, it's also helped us, for instance, create well the numbers and stuff that we have, right? So yeah, that's basically what it comes down to. People don't really belong to a race, but they are othered into a race, or as Falguni says it, they are racialized. Now, coincidence would have it that BLM does also use this language. Exactly, the term racialized is something they have used in the past and probably will use in the future. It should be said that this doesn't necessarily have to be a conscious thing, right? It doesn't have to be intentional. Because well, our media is, for instance, very much invested in international politics. They are very interested in things that are sensational. So they are more likely to cover, for instance, a terror bombing in Afghanistan than that they are a shooter who killed two in bumfuck whoever wherever in the United States. So yeah, well, what then happens basically is this is the point where people are starting to mistrust each other, starting to be like, well, I don't really want to serve a Muslim because they might blow me the hell up. So I'm just gonna go ahead and not really serve them or serve them as well as I would other people. And then at a certain point, there will be a legislator, somebody who makes laws, right? And they see the same threat, and they're going to want to mitigate that threat. They might do this consciously. They might consciously make racist laws, but they may also, you know, just want to mitigate any potential damages, and that's where racist laws come.
Now, it's
Yeah,
interesting when you mention things like racist laws, um, because obviously in the past there are very distinctly racist laws, weren't there? Definitely, there were laws where if you were black, you had to sit a different bus, you had to go to a different school, you had to do X, Y, Z, and there is now the appearance of things being fair and equal because the laws don't apply to race. At least when we think about somewhere like the United States, it is not something that is necessarily a clear racist law. However, there are still arguments to say that the law might still favour Caucasians, for example, in America, aren't there?
yeah, exactly. And there's actually two main forces of this. Um, One is well, laws that disproportionately negatively affect people of color or people of what is perceived to be another race. There's also the training and directives that law enforcement personnel have, which uh, I don't know how that is in the United States, but they aren't given very much media attention where I live, so I don't imagine it being any better in the United States. Uh, they can be a lot more openly racist, or at least more bigoted in nature.
So, when you're talking about the training of someone like a police officer, how exactly do you think this changes for people of various colours?
Well, I happen to have heard a podcast not too long ago called Behind the Police, which I very much encourage everybody to listen. In one of their episodes, they talk about killology, and killology, just like something else you may be more familiar with, is warrior training. Um, are basically kinds of training that warn police officers of the dangers that they will face disproportionately. So, one of the things that Killology uses is that they play a tape made from a body cam of a normal police traffic stop with a black man who seems to be unhinged, and that man uh, just all of a sudden out of nowhere draws a gun, shoots at the officer, and throughout the training it is repeated about I believe 5 7 times. You
Oh
should
wow!
really listen to the episode to get you know the the full glory of it.
So, I mean, from
And they
that, I
say
mean,
if you're
you're
not
saying
quick
that there's
enough
a
to draw,
bias ball
you're gonna
at
die.
there's a bias at that point. No, they're actually putting the bias in right at the front of it all. And
Yeah.
is it always a black guy in these situations, or are there sometimes they use a white guy as well?
From what I understand, I haven't researched police training in the US enough to give a definitive answer here, but from what I have understood, they disproportionately use black people for these training schools.
Well, I mean,
But the
anyone
real
out there
problem
that
is, of
is a
course,
police officer or has experienced a police training, it'd be interesting to hear from any of you to see how your police training went. Because what we don't want to do is give a single view about the way things are. But I will agree with what Martin is saying, and actually, it does seem to be this way. This is the same sort of thing that I have heard as well. It's just one of those things where I realise that my experience and Martain's experience and whatever we've listened to and all of the podcasts and etc. like that, they might not be the only experience people have had. So if you can provide an example of the similar sort of training that Martain is referring to here, then please do. We are more than open to correcting our previous statements on this. Sorry, carry on, Martijn.
Yeah, of course. No, I totally agree. But what the problem really is for most of these things is that there's an implicit message there. Whether the guy is black or white, that doesn't really necessarily matter. The point is that through that sort of messaging, you are basically telling cops to be afraid and to make sure that they draw their weapon before somebody else does. And that is something that's, well, really scary.
On that
And
subject, though,
it,
shouldn't police officers be afraid? They are putting themselves out there. They do have a bloody scary job. The work that they do, and then we do have to appreciate the fact that they are putting themselves on the line for a lot of us. Josh says the us versus them culture keeps certain groups together emotionally and physically, which makes it easier to do it intentionally and unintentionally, which further feeds the us versus them culture, which is true as well. I mean, if we think about that whole sort of thing, we do actually see a lot of these situations as us versus them, and it doesn't matter. I mean, we can apply this to debates online as well. You're talking about someone with a different opinion to you, and all of a sudden it becomes a battle rather than a conversation. So you turn that into something far more serious, that's something about race and crime and all of that, where fucking guns are involved. Could you imagine if there was a gun involved in every single internet debate? Blimey! I mean, to be honest, talk about thinning the herd. We definitely would have by now. I just don't know who would have won.
I'd be dead 50,000 times over by this point.
Same.
Especially because I'm a shit marksman.
I tried to catch fog this
we
morning, you know. Missed. The anger that went across your face right then was just.
All right, but at any rate, we do tend to more easily scare when it comes to well, people of color. To be honest, in fact, there is a study that I can't properly cite right now that has been done that actually says that black people more negatively associate black people with crimes, etc. So yeah,
So there's almost an internal form of racism going on there as well. Would you say that black people tend to look at other black people in a negative light and a sort of thing?
yeah, but that's we don't know exactly where that comes from.
Right.
But we can make a few educated guesses, of course. So I'm gonna leave that kind of speculation out there because I want to stick to what I know best. Um, but yeah, I do think that there's some very strong social currents underlying that.
Yeah,
Power
no, that
structures
makes
can
sense.
create a narrative.
Do you think that could be sort of the same sort of thing where, in the way that perhaps we might view the new atheist brand of atheist, we're technically associated with them, but there's a certain pattern of behaviors that we don't want to be associated with. And do you think that maybe in the same way that if we actually consider it, the people of color might see the stereotypical view of someone in a particular city, they go, that doesn't apply to us. I wish I wasn't associated with that person, but I clearly am because my skin is the same color as theirs. Therefore, everybody is going to think that I am like them. I know it's an association fallacy, essentially, but do you think that there could be that as part of it?
Well, I think if we are going to get into speculation, I think that it's a two-parter. Um, basically black people are disproportionately likely to live in low-income areas with high crime, which means that they are also disproportionately the victim of black on black crime, which is something we'll get into later. And another thing is the internalizing of negative messaging. So if you keep getting told over and over again, white people are evil, white people do this, white people do that, white people rape a lot, white people steal a lot, white people shoot each other a lot, uh, eventually you're gonna see everybody else that is white as a threat.
Yeah, no, that
So
makes
I
a hell
think,
of a lot of sense. I
yeah,
mean,
that's why I
we
said I
kind of
think we
see
can
that
guess,
as
but
in we
I
all
can't prove
generalize,
this.
don't we? We all generalize. I mean, we are induction machines, and if you see a large proportion of a certain person doing something, I mean, consider how people perceive the average Trump supporter. Now, some of these are actually generally quite fine people, but the bulk of them are those MAGA red hats. I'm going to kill you with my AR-15 if you say anything that displeases me type person that looks quite inbred. Um, but there are some of them out there that are not that, and they, well, when you think about the original reason that they voted for Trump is because they wanted someone so different. It's not because they necessarily thought Trump was going to be good. They thought that he'd bring out real change, and they might not necessarily have even liked him, but they thought that actually he was someone that was so different from everything else. But the thing is, you tend to think of that certain Trump supporter when someone says that they support Trump. You instantly make a judgment of, oh well, you fit in this variety of person right here, don't you?
Yeah, typically you do. Typically, but to be honest, I think you're merited to at this point. But yeah, that's just me. So, anyway, let's get further into systemic racism, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, what we basically see today is a result of well, more than 400 years of well, uh, a lot of misery, to be honest. Um, First we had, of course, the slavery. Then there were Jim Crow's laws. Um, yeah, those were very targeted, of course. Yeah, and then we got another few of these kinds of charming little nuggets, like something I can't pronounce, anti-miscegenation laws. Is that right? You know,
I don't know.
laws against race mixing.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and of course, the often cited redlining thing, which basically meant that well, people that were black or persons of color actually weren't allowed to buy houses. They couldn't apply for mortgages. In fact, the mortgage thing actually ran towards, I believe, the 1970s. So that's really charming. That's like 50 years ago. And this stopped people of color from buying homes. And buying homes is about, I believe, 80% of where the wealth in America comes from, which is inheritance and already existing capital. So what we have here are people who are systematically actually denied the opportunity to have capital, and are therefore, I believe it was 1/7 poorer than than the average white person, and are now increasingly forced to live in rental housing, which means they still can't afford a fucking house because oftentimes rent prices, ironically, are higher than mortgage prices, which
Yeah,
is awesome.
I mean, to be honest, that's a problem I had for very, very many years. My rent was so much that I couldn't actually afford to buy a property myself. This is a problem that so many people have. right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a thing. I've got the privilege of my race and my family and everything like that, you know, going for me. I've had, realistically speaking, an amazing education comparatively to how some people have experienced the world. Yet I've had a hell of a lot of trouble doing, you know, any of these things that a lot of people do, and this is a problem that's becoming more and more apparent. But as Martijn says, I mean, this problem is much more significantly an issue with people of color. You know, and because there is a history of negativity there that is going against them. So yeah, sorry, carry on, Martin.
Yeah, well, I was basically just going to spend the rest of the time we spent on this subject summing up a lot of these kinds of injustices, simply to drive home a point later. So these neighborhoods where these people are actually sort of forced to live, right? They are basically what they tend to be further away from places of employment. They tend to be either food deserts, which are places where you can't get any food, or food swamps, places where you can only get unhealthy forms of food. They have substandard schooling, substandard housing. They are further away from
On that
actually
front,
everything.
Josh just asked, do you think that the housing issue is potentially the cornerstone of the problem with the whole financial issue that we're discussing right here? Do you think that you know, if the housing was potentially realigned elsewhere, we could solve a hell of a lot of the problem?
Um, we could solve a lot of it, I guess, but I don't think it's going to be a uh, how do you call that? I don't think it's going to be the definitive solution, by
Right.
no means. I think what basically happened, and I'm not sure if this is a conscious or intentional effort from the government's part. I do suspect it is, but I can't say with any certainty. I think that because they can no longer oppress people based on the color of their skin, that they are now basically oppressing people based on the size of their wallet. I think been turned into a class issue where formerly it was a racism. So that's basically where I'm at.
Makes a lot
How
of
about
sense.
you, Dave?
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. They're basically just using economic pressure to apply a similar sort of barrier that they used to just use racist laws for.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's the thing.
You
All
actually
right,
gave us
cool.
all a quite a good example of that the other day, Martijn, which I think we should come to shortly. I'm just going to take a brief toilet break because I started the beers early tonight, so I'm going to turn the music up and I'll be right back. I do apologise.
Something in me. You've not been listening very fucking clever. This castle has become my home. I exist from my broken soul. Devoid of life, but I digress. This fading shame is all that's left. Lost without a feeling, I've become so numb.
anyone's truly interested in watching me pee, all they have to do is subscribe to our top tier on our Patreon site and be there for at least 3 months, and then I will let you watch me pee.
We're supposed to be selling Patreon, not putting people away.
You also have to ask for it if you decide you don't want it. You know? No, sorry. I apologise for having to do that. It was one of those calls of nature that was desperately needed.
I'm going to send you a catheter.
Well,
Just pee in a bottle.
That's the thing. When we're doing the podcast, there's no camera on us, and I can just pee in a bottle. But when we're live on air, I mean, there's cameras and all sorts. I mean, if I'd have gone like this for a little while, I think people would have realised that I probably wasn't focusing on what you were saying. But as I was saying, there was an example that you gave us the other day that basically described some of the issues that people would have in this sort of framework that you mentioned about how, the money and legality and all that sort of stuff. So you were talking about how the education system, for example, is funded by housing in America, isn't it? The housing tax.
Yeah, it's funded by property tax, which is very funny for something for a neighborhood that's only rental.
Right.
It simply means that they can't hope to get enough money for such a school. And because it's a more crappy school, even things like bake sales, which are apparently a thing in America, can't make up for that difference.
Right.
It also creates a kind of subjectivity where it reinforces this idea that they're poor, they're never going to get better, they're never going to get the education that others get.
Yeah.
And that it creates that kind of vicious cycle, doesn't it?
And equally, if they
Yeah,
genuinely do have a worse education, they're never going to get the opportunities other people with the perceived better education could as well. You consider the way that people view someone that maybe goes to a community college over someone who goes to Harvard or somewhere like that. There is that, oh, well, you got your degree here. At the end of the day, most degrees are virtually the same as each other. So the school you go to shouldn't matter too much. It's what you learn at that college, for example. But, because of these people, I don't get me wrong, Martijn, I know what you're going to say. There are some that definitely push people harder, try a lot harder.
Oh no, that's not what I'm gonna say actually.
Oh yeah, go for it.
For a lot of schools like Harvard, you're not really paying that much for the education. You're paying a lot for the people you're gonna meet and the people, the system you're gonna build up, and that's where the opportunities come from.
Yeah, it's the contacts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just having the name as well. That in and itself is, I mean, you consider over here someone who went to Oxford or Cambridge. You're suddenly like, oh, well, that's rather professional. Ooh, yeah, and you consider someone who did the same degree with all the same content through maybe the Open University or something like that. They might not be looked at in the same way, or they went to some Scouse University up north, and again, they might have done the exact same degree. Yeah, it's that equivalent. Yeah, I tell you what, I really enjoyed that TV show. But there is that general opinion from people of what these places and things are like. And that's not necessarily the way it is. It's just the fact that there is this bias there that people have. They go, oh, you went to Oxford. Oh, well, you must be good. Yeah, I only got an E. Yeah, but you know what? I got a first, and I went through the OU. Oh, well, the OU, that doesn't matter. That's just online. That doesn't mean anything. And people do have these biases there. and actually they're there throughout every aspect of our life, aren't they? That is a big problem. And I suppose with our original question, what is racism, right? It's that bias against someone that's different. It's a form of bigotry. It generally refers to someone that is different enough from you that you don't see them as the same as you. Okay, so there are a lot of British people in Britain, right? And I suppose a large majority of British people are white, but there's a lot of Indian British people, and by that I mean they're of Indian descent, but most of them have been born and raised here, you know? There's a lot of African British people, and what I mean that is they've come from a line of people from Africa, and there's a lot of West Indian people, and they might have come from Jamaica or Barbados, or they're all British. At the end of the day, most of them have been born and bred here, yet we still see them as a different tribe. As Josh says, different tribes. We do. We are a tribal species. It's one of those things as part of our evolution that has helped us survive, right? It is. It's just one of those things that we have unfortunately taken on as not necessarily an overly positive aspect and continued through everything else. We are guilty of binary thoughts, with us or against us mentalities, right? We see people who are different from us as being wrong. We don't take the time to understand who they are. They're wrong from being different. And so when we consider that, and in the UK, I would say racism is definitely a lot better than it is in America, but I would not absolve us from that. I remember things when I was at school, and probably things that I said myself that I'm not proud of, but I didn't really have any real understanding. But I lived in an area that was quite predominantly Indian and African anyway. And so at that point in time, I actually didn't see the whole race thing. I experienced a very multicultural environment. And it wasn't until I was a little bit older that I realised that there was this racism thing. Because where I was at school, I was at a private school, but everyone was basically the same. You know, it didn't matter where they came from. They were just the key differences between us were whether they were smart or not, and whether they were good at sport or not. They were the things we focused on at my primary school. But that's unfortunately not the experience a lot of people have. And learning about a lot of this stuff and where people's pegging is, you know, I had a lot of privilege that I didn't realise I had. And everyone at the school I was at was privileged. But I was more privileged than a lot of them. And I didn't see it that way, because as a kid you don't. And as you grow up as an adult, you don't necessarily realise the privilege you have with these things either. That's just the way it goes. When something has always been the way it is, that's just the way it is. Isn't it, really? It's a key mistake that so many of us make.
Yeah, that's true, and well, what you're saying there, yeah, it is what it is, right? You're gonna have to live anyway, whether you're underprivileged or overprivileged. That doesn't really matter. The only thing we should call upon, I think, is that we should respect the fact that we have for a long time been mistreating underprivileged people, and that maybe we should more often listen to what they have to say and try to at least move ourselves towards the points they are making. For instance, I've had this discussion today about one of the more charming customs in my country, Black Pete, and well, there too. I mean, it's been a very racialized discussion, right? Right? It's been playing out for, I believe, 7 years now, and people where the discussion I think went wrong was where people said Black Pete is racist, which then triggers people who do like Black Pete into thinking like, was I just called a racist? And then they join the discussion with new fervor, and then they actually start to take on racist tropes, right? They start to join the racist side of the conversation, and they start to be like, well, black people are like this, and you know, you should get back to your own country, and stuff like that, which doesn't help anyone. So what I think should have happened was that the people who are victimized by Black Pete, because they are, that's gonna cost me a lot of shit. Anyway, because they should have just said like, listen, this is a problem for our community because XYZ, right? And can we at least address XYZ? That would have gone over a whole lot different, and you would have had a lot less polarized of a conversation.
I think that you've raised a fantastic point there within debate. When you accuse someone of a particular behavior being a particular way. So, for example, if we think about racism in this sense, right? We think that people don't want to be perceived as racist in general, right? I think that's a fair statement, isn't it? No one really wants to be seen as someone who is actually racist. Cool. So the second you accuse someone of being racist, they're going to be a bit resistant to what's going on. And I think the same thing can be said in debate with people about other things that you experience online. You say, oh, well, you're just a liar because you're saying this. And the thing is, they're not necessarily being a liar because they completely believe it to be true. But all of a sudden, you've accused them of being a liar and they're instantly against you. And that can be the same thing of accusing someone of being a racist when they're not intentionally being racist. They don't necessarily have an issue with someone based on their race. What they don't realize is their perception comes across of things comes across as racist. And they might have a single idea. For example, let's say Black Pete's okay, right? Now, Black Pete isn't actually supposed to be a racist thing anyway. Black Pete isn't Black Pete because he is of African descent or whatever, is he? I think he's supposed to be Black Pete because he's a coal miner. Is that right, Martijn?
Well, there's a lot of different explanations.
Okay.
But let's first address this this point. Black Pete originated in the Gilded Age, which is the age between 1500s and the 1600s. Well, where the Netherlands had the East India Trading Company, which caused a lot of slavery and indentured servitude all across the world. But that being said, the festivities themselves outdate that time. It is actually based on an Old Norse tradition of Wodan crossing the skies with his ravens, and actually Black Pete in that sense would be black because of the ravens being black, right? Then there are more there are newer kinds of reasons for him to be black, which is that he was a chimney sweep, or at least that he goes down the chimney to deliver the gifts just like Santa Claus does, only while Santa Claus isn't affected by the soot, Black Pete is. And for some reason he comes on the other side with having girls and a slave earring and all kinds of that shit. But yeah. And violently red lips, by the way.
Yeah, it's almost sort of like the, I don't know if you remember the old Tom and Jerry cartoons with the mammy. It's that sort of look, isn't it?
Yeah. It's really cartoonish. It's as blackface as you can get it, while you know the intention behind it may not necessarily be blackface. Yeah.
Although it could allow some to hide behind it, which I think is also kind of a problem. I'm not being racist, but they actually are. They're just using it as a kind of shield.
Yeah.
It's basically, yeah, it's just something that has evolved a certain way, which probably has racist reasons for it. You know, dehumanizing the people you're trading off. I mean, that does seem, yeah. But then again, you can't be sure because there's never been somebody who said, and now we're making Black Pete black because he's an N-word.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that's evolved over time with no actual historical record, so it makes it that little bit harder, doesn't it?
It's hard to take away intent from perception. For example, one of my friends, a job I had probably about 10 years ago now, one of the loveliest guys ever, and honestly, he is one of my favorite people to talk to, and he is actually responsible for me getting involved in the online debate because he was actually a creationist. He's the only one I have ever met in England. But he is one of the most lovely guys ever. I still chat to him from time to time, see how his family's doing and all of that business. I mean, genuinely fantastic guy, no doubt about it. He has some weird ideas about things. He, believes the world's like only 6,000 years old and all of that. But if you take that one topic out of the picture, he is one of those people that is great, and he would do anything for you. I can't even remember what my point was there because I've been talking so long about how much I like this guy.
Drunkard.
Oh, yeah, there you go. I've remembered. But I mean, I referred to him as my chocolate bear, and I could understand how someone could potentially see that as a racist comment. It could be, but there was no racial intent there. There was a lot of love there between the two of us, right?
Oh yeah, I've had a friend I used to call cotton picker. But that was just friendly quip.
Yeah, but in a certain situation with people who have accepted parameters, you can actually say these offensive things, right? When I was at boarding school, right, we had our Ruskies, our Chinks, and our Honkies, and all of that. We used really offensive terminology with each other because we liked each other, right? That was a very different situation. We were taking the piss out of people who were generally racist and all of that jazz, to say, do you know what? Fuck all of you guys. We are who we are. We like each other. We don't really give a shit about all of this stuff. But great. But that's friendly banter. There's context there. You can understand it, right? I mean, I'm sure I could say anything to either of you two that could equally be taken as a racist comment. And I'm not talking colour skin, but obviously he's like a Welsh Canadian and you're a Dutchie, and I'm sure I could think of a number of different things that I could say about you, just as you could say for me, being that standard middle-class white boy. You could think of a number of slurs, but between us, we'd go, do you know what? That doesn't matter. We're friends. We have the context of being able to do this. However, when it comes to something like Black Pete, it no longer just affects you, right? It's no longer because of the world, because of the way the internet works. We're in a situation where actually, sorry, I fucked up a mix there whilst I was trying to talk. We're in a situation where it does affect more people. We're in a situation where actually the inappropriateness of it becomes a bit more apparent. Even though it wasn't intentionally inappropriate in the first place, as far as we can tell, it wasn't intentionally racist, and the people that go along with the whole Black Pete thing are not necessarily racist. We can perhaps see that now is a time to change because maybe it's causing people harm that it didn't intend to in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. When racialized minorities tell you like, I don't like this, and especially when you have a history of exploiting those people, perhaps you should just simply move to their side a bit. Not even all the way, but just, do some concessions and make sure everybody gets to, live happily.
I mean, wasn't there
That's
another good
all
example
I'm
with
saying.
that recently on the was it the BBC, who basically pulled Little Britain from the shelves, from Netflix, from the BBC, and all of that sort of stuff. And that's not because the intent of Little Britain was necessarily racist, right? The purpose of that show was to take the piss out of us. And by us, I mean the British, right? So in the British, you do have your chavs. You do have people of different races. They may be of African descent, or they may be of Danish descent, or they may be Welsh, or whatever. You've got a lot of people who live in this melting pot of a country. But there are certain things in there that are considered inappropriate now. Now, one thing the show did well was it didn't necessarily focus on a particular character or a particular group. And there were people in there that were racist. But that part of it was actually taking the piss out of people who were racist, not like trying to say that it was okay to be racist. They were showing how fucking idiotic racist people sounded. But because of everything that's been going on in the world, they were like, do you know what? Maybe we should pull this show and have a think about things. Maybe relaunch it slightly differently or whatever. And that was a good move on their part, right? Even though there was nothing that was intentionally offensive to people past, cunting off ourselves. Because, do you know what? That's what the British do best. We take the piss out of ourselves. And everyone else, to be fair, we take the piss. That's what we do. Apparently I do it so loudly the missus can hear me 2 floors down,
Do it again? Do it again?
But I think that was the right move on their part, even though I know that they didn't necessarily intend things in an offensive way. And I think most people know that they didn't. And when you look at the posts on places like Twitter and all of that, people of a variety of origins, but especially people of colour, were going, but that show wasn't offensive. They were just taking the piss. They were having a laugh. I loved that show. But even still, the fact is, they were like, well, we might be causing harm to others. So let's see what we can do to reduce that harm. And then let's go from here and maybe present a show that isn't causing harm to anyone. And isn't that a good thing in itself? Should we not try and cause as little harm as possible and try and make people as happy as possible?
As long as you're still the only gay in the village.
Darling.
I know postmodernism is kind of a dirty word these days, especially in the skeptic community, but I think one of the reasons that it's important is the idea of deconstruction, and deconstruction can help us to understand a bunch of this stuff.
I am still not really sure on what postmodernism is, to be honest. I've watched like 15 videos on it, but still don't know.
It's looking at historical narratives and looking where they've been mythologized, or, one element, looking where it's been mythologized and where power structures have been created, and looking at how these power structures affect the whole of society and how we can improve and sort of bring about better structures.
That sounds like what I'm doing.
Oh, it is. But a lot of
Yes.
people see it as kind of a dirty word, and I think it kind of needs to stop in the skeptic community, and it's something that we need to be doing, is sort of looking at things in a deconstructionist manner.
It's too bad that I haven't rehearsed my Dr. Peterson for this. That's kind of a shame.
Yeah, but Marxism. That's all you've got to say, you know.
I know some Dr. Zeus.
Oh, we're
would
gonna
that,
get
would
to
that
that
sort
later.
of fill in?
Nice one.
I feel like I'm trying to divert the conversation too far away from what your original intention was. Intention, not attention. Blimey. I mean, apologise for me. You should apologise for me because I can't do it properly right now. But please carry on with what you were saying. I think we've discussed what racism is and what race is, and you know, how there is an intent part of racism, and there can be things that are perceived as racist that are not intended to be racist, but sometimes if there is enough of a perception of that this thing is racist, even though it wasn't intended to be, perhaps it doesn't cost you anything to change it. To put it into a different perspective, there was that whole thing with man-sized tissues. Now, there were people who were upset about the whole use of man-sized tissues. Now, my initial response to that, and you know, I'm probably going to make myself look bad by saying this, but I like to be as honest with you all as I can. I thought, my God, that's pathetic, right? Why are you complaining about these man-sized tissues? The way I saw it was, if we're talking law of averages, men are bigger than women, therefore they have more snot than women, and men complain more about colds than women, therefore they need bigger tissues because they're bigger babies, right? That's the way I saw it, and that's why I didn't see a problem, right? But then I listened to more of the argument, and it was saying that some people saw that something being man-sized was a more positive thing, just for being man rather than being woman. You've put gendered language into something that is unnecessary. And all of a sudden you go, well, yeah. And then I thought about it, and I'm like, do I care if these things are called man-sized or not? Or can they just be called extra large? And again, it costs me nothing to use extra large tissues over man-sized tissues. I don't care. Just as long as I know which ones are going to be the ones that I have to give to the missus because she's a much bigger baby than me.
We all tell ourselves that, Joe. That's not true.
But realistically speaking, like when you think about these situations outside of your bubble, you realise that there are things that perhaps you didn't consider before because of your position, because of your privilege, because of the way you see the world, because of your life, because of the way you've experienced things. And you might not necessarily have a bad bone in your body, but something you have said has upset someone because of a long history that you're not even aware of. And it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to do what you can with that information. And I think that's where it comes with the whole racism thing. Yes, there are people who are intentionally man-sized tampons. Yes, Josh. We should so have man-sized tampons. They go right up our nose when we have our little nosebleeds.
Should we have woman-sized suppositories then?
Does that mean they'll be bigger or smaller? I mean, but I mean, on that front, like there is not necessarily any bad blood with anyone, but sometimes you have to realise that there is bad blood that you are not aware of yourself, right? And sometimes you might not want to change your behaviour because there's nothing actually negative in your behaviour, but the perception of your behaviour is one that is perceived as negative. And realistically, if you're causing harm to someone else just because you think man-sized tissues is okay, I mean, seriously, why are you fighting this? And it's the same thing for something like Black Pete, right? There is, I mean, depending on who you talk to, there's not necessarily any real racism in Black Pete, right? I see, and that's a good answer from Martijn, because sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't, and it depends who you talk to. But
Also,
I think
I'm the Dutchie. I have a responsibility here.
but most people, would you say in Holland or the Netherlands, don't don't necessarily see it in that racist way. Even if it might have a racist root, they're not necessarily thinking racially themselves.
No, yeah, it's for most people. It's just simple nostalgia. I mean, they were raised with a Black Pete, and they like Black Pete, so they want Black Pete to stay black.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of any other myth that you might have. Your Santas and your leprechauns. I mean, all leprechauns are Irish, right? Aren't they? Aren't they all Irish? I mean, if the Irish suddenly had a problem with the whole leprechaun thing, to be honest, they might. I don't know, and I do apologise if all of you leprechauns, I mean Irish,
them a lot of tourism money.
Yeah.
Of course it would. I feel that I'm probably more qualified to say that because I'm a little bit Irish. I'm also a little bit Danish, so I know my bacon. But without getting into a whole conversation about meat products, there is the separation of intent versus things that are actually intended to be racist. But equally, I think we can be a little bit more understanding on that front. We understand that racism is essentially a bigoted reaction to someone of different origins to you, and that origin could be many years and generations down the line. If I moved to America and I had family over years, but someone was suddenly against the English and hated my great grandchildren, that would be the same thing. It wouldn't necessarily happen, and I'm not saying it would happen, but that's essentially putting it in terms of white on white hate versus the standard, what we see from these various tribal behaviors, which, and then that's what happens. A lot of it does just come down to color, and that's the worst thing about it, I think. You're judging someone purely on the color of their skin, and actually there's a lot of different brown people from a lot of different places, and there's a lot of different white people from a lot of different places, and there's a lot of different yellowy, browny, beigey people from a lot of different places, and do you know what, there's other colors in between. And then there's the English people who are on holiday who all look like lobsters because they feel they're too hardcore for fucking sun cream, and they're going to get cancer and die by the time they're 50. But, you know, we've got all of these different colours around us, and we're basing judgments on them based purely on the colour of their skin. How fucking ridiculous is that? How ridiculous is that? But that tends to be what most racism is based on. Colour of skin. Because you're not actually basing it on, you know, race or nationalism or anything like that. You're basing it purely on, you look different to me, therefore you are wrong.
Yeah, basically, only by this time it's a lot deeper, as we've already treated, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, it is still valid for the person going to an NBA match, standing along the sidelines, yelling the N-word all the time. I mean, I like to think that that's a minority even among racists.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was about to just wrap up the systemic racism part by sort of expressing that all of the above, which were like the underfunded schools, the food deserts and food swamps, the low possibility for employment, and even if employed, long distance travel, all those things. They make sure that a lot of people who live in those areas are poverty stricken. And what we always see all over the planet is that where there's poverty, there's an excess crime. Now, this is an important point to bring home because one of the major criticisms about Black Lives Matter is that Black lives don't matter according to black people because they keep shooting each other, which is not an actual thing motivated by hate towards each other. It is more motivated by the fact that for a lot of black people, the most legitimate way of getting money is selling drugs or doing some kind of capital, no, crime of capital. Sorry, that's a different thing. um, and basically just yeah, stealing, selling drugs, and a lot of people to avoid the misery of their everyday existence are more likely to do drugs and can be arrested for those kinds of and everything that has to do with those sorts of crime uh, bring with it a high percentage chance of violence and lethal violence at that. So yeah, that's basically where the systemic racism thing uh, goes. Um, you're practically not giving people any chance to live a decent life without turning to something of an illicit way of getting money, even just to tie over to the end of the month.
I think another thing as well is because this high crime rate is created, they then push more police into that area
Yeah,
because they call it high crime, and then more and more crimes are caught, so it looks even greater crime, and more people are caught up in this web, and that creates further misery because they have these petty felons who are then stuck in a dead-end cycle of crime because they can't get out, they can't get a job, and it's just a sort of self-reinforcing crime statistic.
yeah, exactly. And the same is true for violent arrests, right? I mean, where you're gonna arrest more people, you're gonna get more resistances of arrest, which, controversial opinion, I think should not be punishable. Okay.
Yeah, I
At
mean
least
that
not
that that one is a bit of a difficult one. I think it's. I think the whole picture there needs to be taken account of. I understand resisting arrest. Oh, if you haven't done it, you're being wrongfully arrested. Then I can understand why. But equally, if you are wrongfully arrested, wouldn't you just go, "Well, I ain't got nothing to hide."
Yeah, no, that's really one of the great misconceptions of our time.
It is,
Um,
because so many people
well-
are wrongfully arrested, but we have to raise these points so you can explain them, Martijn, so go for it.
Yeah, okay, well, one thing, this is the argument I always go to, which people tell me is not particularly strong. I tend to disagree. The fact is that when police are arresting you, they are perpetrating violence upon you. They're perpetrating violence in giving you a ticket. That's financial violence. They're perpetrating violence of freedom when they take you down to the station. If we are going to say that we have the right to self-defense, then we must be able to defend ourselves non-violently, or at the very least non-lethally, to that violence that they are perpetrating upon. It's fairly simple. Even if you have committed a crime, the ability to walk away from being apprehended should be your right, as long as you do not do it by using violence or excessive violence.
Any
That's
contestant to that, Dave? Like, I mean, I know this is something you generally agree with yourself, but what is something that you might see as a common contest to that?
Okay, that's quite a complicated one, because there's so many social stigmas to resisting arrest. It's if you haven't done anything wrong, then you shouldn't be resisting. But really, if you haven't done anything wrong, you should be putting up the most resistance, because there are people that have gone to jail awaiting trial for a couple of years and then found not guilty. So you will still, even having not done anything, there's still a chance that you will be locked up awaiting trial. So resisting in a case like that seems to be more of something that needs to be done.
To go on a flight of fantasy, right? You almost see this in movies where someone has been wrongfully accused by a particular maybe they were working for the FBI, but someone in the FBI has planted evidence against them because they wanted to do something wrong and they are misusing their government things, etc. I mean, I know we're going into extreme cases and flights of fantasy here, but it's that sort of situation where technically if resisting arrest is completely illegal, then what they have done is wrong. But all of us are cheering for that person who's like, no, they never did that. They were a good person. They were always good. They're trying to clear their name. So they resisted arrest, got away from the police, FBI, CIA, whoever it was, and they're doing the right thing by doing what they are doing. Yet we hear about something on the news and we go, oh, they were resisting arrest. Clearly they were bad. Clearly they were wrong. Clearly. And all of a sudden we have a different attitude to it. We don't know their story, yet with someone in the movie, we do know their story. We know that they're good. Well, how do we know that this person who was on the street, who was being wrongfully arrested, and let's say, for example, they are definitely being wrongfully arrested, but we don't know that, well, surely we should give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, you know? Why are we being so judgmental to other people when we don't know their entire story?
Well, there's another way to look at it as well. There's a lot of talk about resisting tyranny, and what's more tyrannical than being arrested for something you haven't done?
Being under Trump. No, I completely agree with what you're saying. I'm just being a dick.
There's a fairly valid counter. I mean, I don't know how you'd respond to it, but that's the counter I get most when I say that resisting arrest should be a right, and that is that you are then severely impacting respect for law enforcement and making it impossible for them to do their jobs. I mean, I would respond to that by, well, if they can't apprehend me when I'm resisting arrest, they can't do their jobs. But, right?
Well, something I'd say is the police often impact their ability to do their job by being caught doing things like planting drugs when it turns out that they've arrested the wrong person or the person has nothing on them. Shooting innocent people, shooting dogs. There's all kinds of things that impacts the police's ability to do their job by the police itself.
Shooting someone in the back for 7 times.
Yeah.
What was it 8?
I think it was 7. Yeah. It
Kneeling
was
on
a bit
someone's
excessive,
neck.
whatever it was.
Yeah, I mean, 2 should have done it, right? At the very most.
Well, I mean, you've also got cases like a SWAT team breaking into a house, shooting a woman on a sofa who's sleeping and saying, oops, sorry, wrong house, and then moving on to the next house.
Yep.
I apologize for laughing at that, but sometimes some things are so bloody ridiculous you can't help but laugh.
That's the thing. I think I would agree that the police have a tough job, and
They definitely do. I've got friends who are police, you know, and
Yeah.
they're great people.
and the point of a society is to create a peaceful social structure where we can all feel safe. But if you feel under threat by the police, just in general, because of their behavior, then their job is impacted as peacekeepers by themselves, by the state, by the institutions that back them up, and the ranks that close silence.
That's exactly one of the reasons why I really like the slogan "No justice, no peace," because basically there is no peace when there's injustice. That's basically just a fact of life.
Totally agree. But I think it's a very complicated issue, one that we could probably discuss for hours on a stream in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that realistically speaking, we've covered a lot of detail tonight, and I mean, this was just the first point you really wanted to discuss, wasn't it, Martijn? You know, we haven't even got into the whole Black Lives Matter movement in itself. And that's fantastic in itself, because it means that we've got a lot to cover in future streams. But I don't want to bore people. I mean, right now we've done the Black Lives Matter, what is racism, what is race, what can we say about this particular topic, and we've discussed a couple of topics that will probably be coming out in far more detail later on. We've discussed things like intent, and how does intent relate to racism, and the perception as well. And these are two key points that you need to remember. You know, I can say something with the intent of it being perfectly friendly, but it can still be perceived as maybe something that is racist, right? Now, as I said with my friend of talking about him about the chocolate bear, he took it as a friendly thing. You know, we loved each other to pieces. Our morning and night, I mean, every day we had a cuddle, right? And there was nothing there that was seen as racist. However, if there were a few people who turned around and said, we actually find your nickname for him offensive, and he wasn't going to stand up and say anything about it, and we didn't have that discussion, well, do you know what? My responsibility there is to decide whether I want to upset a large number of people or just carry on doing what I'm doing. And there is an arrogant part of me that would go, well, fuck you, it's not my problem if you're offended. And I do get that. I feel that a lot about a lot of things. However, there's another part of me that wants to do the best I can for everyone around me. And I don't want to upset people unnecessarily. And I'm not going into the whole culture of where we should necessarily adhere to everyone who goes, oh, well, I'm offended. Because, do you know what? People can be offended by anything. And if that's the case, I'm fucking offended by boy bands, right? I don't need any of that shit ever played again, right? I'm offended by most music that came from the noughties onwards, right? Fuck your Keshas and all of that shit, right? If we want to go by offense being something that we judge things on, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. But when we consider there is genuine harm caused by the perception of racism, and that sort of adds a different level. It's not just offense, it's a lot deeper and a lot more meaningful. And there are plenty of people out there who might be going right now going, do you know what, I'd love to be your chocolate bear. And there's other people going out there going, how the fuck could you say that sort of thing? That's so disrespectful, that's so racist, that's, you know, because I've made a reference to colour, and potentially size, you could even say, with the whole bear thing. I mean, at the end of the day, I think I probably got that terminology from Scrubs, you know, which was a comedy show that was great. But I mean, as I said, the intention of the comment was something made out of pure love for someone else. There was no racist intent there. But if enough people were to say that they felt harmed by my comment, that is my responsibility to reduce the harm and no longer use that comment. And that is something that other people out there need to sometimes figure. Yes, you might not mean what you're doing in an offensive or racist way, but there are other people who feel harm about what you are saying, what you are doing. And perhaps, maybe, just reconsider your actions just a little bit. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think one of the things about discussions like this is we have to remember we're far removed from the actual worst effects that we're discussing. So we're looking from the outside in and having a discussion of an experience that we don't really experience. And that's always important to remember.
Yeah, and do you know what? Most people who are not experiencing the racism are exactly in the same position. You know, the number of comments I see on Twitter from people who are so anti-Black Lives Matter and things like that, they are all generally middle-aged or older white guys. And I don't know why that is the case. I mean, that's just a correlation. That is just a correlation that I have noticed. But they're so resistant to it. And it's like, there are people who have probably never been in a situation where this has had any impact, like Dave says. They're so far removed from the actual situation that they're not experiencing the reality.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're not experiencing the reality, it is at least your duty to try to understand that reality.
Absolutely.
So that's why I've also been trying to understand more and more the plight of transgender people, because to be honest, I still don't really understand the concept.
At least you're making the move towards the understanding, though, which I think is one of the most important things. Yeah. I mean, that's why discussions like this are good to some extent, because we are trying to understand. We are trying, even if we're not exactly helping, we are trying to be supportive and trying to help people understand and change minds and things like that.
And I hope people realize that as well. And I hope people ask questions. Because I think realistically, with where we're at in the stream tonight, we can't get onto your next section, Martijn.
I know.
I think that's where we get for well, maybe even next week, maybe the next few weeks. Till we get through all of your sections, that will be our Thursday nights. We'll try and do Black Lives Matter, and if that means we have to put the Fresh Air recordings on hold for a little while, then that's what we do. Because at the end of the day, I think this discussion is actually more important, and people need to realize. And to be honest, I would love people to have the opportunity to ask questions and put things into what we're going on about, and actually go, well, guys, what about this? What about this situation? What about that situation? You've got a whole list of things that you want to cover off, and they're all fantastic. But do you know what? There's a lot of people out there that are on either sides of the coin that might have things that they want to be heard, right? And we might have a Trump supporter that might have heard something tonight and have gone, oh, well, actually, what about? And you know what? That what about is perfect, because we can then have a look at that and go, actually, maybe this is something we haven't considered ourselves, or maybe it is something that has been considered. Maybe we have an answer for them. Maybe we will change one person's mind, and in changing one person's mind about, you know, systemic racism or something like that, they might change someone else's mind. And if we can just improve the world slightly, then I'm really happy, because that's what I want to do. We're only on this world for a very short space of time, really, in the grand scheme of things. And I would like all of us here to somehow improve the world for everyone, not just a particular person, not just people based on their colour of the skin or the country they were born in or the football team they support or anything as irrelevant as that. Just the people on this planet, and fuck it, the animals on this planet as well. Every sentient being, I would like us to do the best to make the world the best it can be for them. And we need to sort ourselves out as humans and be better humans in and of ourselves, both inwardly and outwardly, before we can start looking at the rest of the planet.
Trump supporters won't listen to us. We're Marxists.
Well, I do have a message also for Trump supporters, which should be coming across also in this episode, which is that even if you do not accept the premise of systemic racism, I think we have given enough evidence and arguments here to at least for people to acknowledge that there are problems that systemically negatively influence people who especially live in low-income areas, and that at the very least we should try and mitigate those negative effects. And I think that if you look at the demographics, a lot of Trump supporters do also live disproportionately in rural and low-income areas, and I think it is also within their best interest to at least try to tackle these problems.
Absolutely.
So, I've unified you.
Is
He is Jesus.
To be fair,
Yeah,
if he had longer hair, he probably would look like Jesus a little bit, and a bit of a tan. You need a tan, Martijn.
Jesus is not nearly as balding as I am. He
Well,
has a divine hairline.
He had resurrecting hair. The second it died, it grew back again.
That's it. Yeah, my hairline is halfway to the 7th circle of hell, so.
Genuinely, I've enjoyed tonight. I figured tonight was gonna go longer than we actually intended it to.
Me too. I mean, I'm only on page 2 of 4, so.
Yeah,
I think
fair. I figured that we wouldn't even get to the second page, so the fact that we got to the second page was an achievement as far as I'm concerned.
there's a lot to discuss with this, especially not just the movement itself, but stuff surrounding the movement like disinformation, tactics, and sort of ways that people try to not dispute the claims, but make people wary of the movement itself and turn people away and create kind of tribal mentalities and that kind of thing. And something that Martijn said earlier that was interesting was about choice of words and how that makes people defensive. And there's a lot of stuff like that that can be covered with a topic like this too.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, I even feel like even we've only really covered the first section of what you wanted to discuss, and I still don't feel that we've done it the justice it deserves. So I'm hoping that we get enough comments to start off with some questions next time we have you on, Martijn. And I want to continue the conversation that's going on. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Josh, who threw in some good comments throughout this stream, and anyone else in the place. And also, yes, as you say, Josh in himself bought Martijn that mic. So thank you again, Josh. You actually made Martijn sound alright for once.
I'm gonna go start a rapping career now.
If you need a DJ, I'm not the best.
God damn it.
No, but I've really enjoyed tonight. It's been really nice. I'm really glad that we've had you on here, and you've sounded really clear as well. And that's one of the things, like the Fresh Air podcasts that we do. I spend a lot of time trying to produce them, making them just about right, and cutting out a lot of the fraff that goes on in them. So when it comes to the sci-fi broadcast that we do on YouTube and Twitch and Twitter and Facebook and all those other places, it's you know, we do our best to try and keep the conversation as concise and the quality as good as possible. But with something live like this, it's not necessarily as easy, you know. So I thank you, everybody that has listened to us, and honestly, it's been a pleasure as always chatting to you, Dave, and you, Martijn. And hopefully we can get some time in to try and do a Fresh Air live as well. So next week, or the week after, depending on when people are free, we're going to try and actually record a version of Fresh Air live, which is going to be a bit different to the way we normally do it. So Fresh Air is one of those things that we spend a lot of time planning. It's and a lot of time producing as well. But we're going to try and do a live show, and we're going to see how it works. We're going to see how well it's received, and it might be something that comes out to our patrons, like all of our patrons can experience that sort of thing in future. But we'll always do these sci-fi broadcasts that will usually, apart from my pre-mix, usually only be about an hour. But tonight we've gone way over that. And I'm glad we did, because we needed to. We needed to, and I think with the next few chapters of what Martijn wants to discuss, we're going to need to go overboard as well.
And it's good to have someone smart on, unlike me.
You liar.
I'm starting to think Dave's modesty is completely false. How about you guys out there in internet land?
I am fucking certain. He's like one of those guys who says, I only know that I know nothing, just to imitate Socrates, thereby implying they are fucking smart.
No, not me.
Honestly, we've had a load of fun doing this stream. We enjoy doing all of our streams. We enjoy all of our conversations. We will be back next Tuesday with Chesh, covering off more of the rock theism conversation that I'm sure you're all bored of by now. But I hope you're not, because I'm quite enjoying the conversations, tearing apart Aaron's article that is so filled with confirmation bias that he sounds like a creationist arguing evolution. And also next Saturday we do have Tim O'Neill discussing history for atheists, so all the myths that atheists get wrong. He's an atheist himself, we're atheists. Obviously we're not historians, but this guy is, and he wants to point out a number of things that we get wrong with our ideology, in the same way that Dave and I do when we're pointing out issues with people's logic or definitions of belief or something like that. It's the same sort of thing. So I think that one is going to be a learning experience for both Dave and I.
Cool.
Yeah, you should join us if you can.
If you want to join us, it's Saturday the 12th at 8 PM GMT. You're always welcome to join us, Martijn.
That is my free weekend, I believe.
Oh,
nice one.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll see you there as well. But obviously next week we'll be on Cheshire's stream on Tuesday. We might have a stream on Wednesday. Hopefully Thursday we'll have Martijn back doing Black Lives Matter, and then we will have History for Atheists. And that's it. That's it, folks. That's the end of the stream for the night. You've been listening to Fresh Air Sci-Fi, and I am Joe.
And he's Martijn.
And he's Dave. I don't know which guy. You confuse me.
Have a good night, everyone.
General area.
He's over there somewhere.
Brilliant.